Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. America has been through a lot, political division unlike any since really the Civil War, a year of riots and protests. Our government is broken and financially broke. The pandemic, and more specifically the response to it, has made everything worse. Inflation is on the rise, labor shortages are real, and it's becoming worse. It's fair to say that the nation is incredibly fragile at the moment. It feels a bit like a powder keg in search of a match, and it's in times like these where the office of the president actually matters a lot. We were told that this president would be a uniter, President McUnity. The mean tweeting would be gone, replaced by a kinder, gentler president named Joe Biden from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Well, only 9 months into his presidency, we know that we now elected someone who seems dead set on increasing division. And by we, I mean all the people who voted for him. In fact, as the holidays approach, it appears that we elected the Grinch who just might steal Christmas. And they would do that by making everything worse with bad policy after bad policy. And perhaps the worst one, because it certainly isn't a law, it's just a policy, is the administration's insane pursuit of nearly 100% vaccination rates via mandates. So here is Joe Biden touting the success of his authoritarian mandates just last week. Watch.
These requirements are already proving that they work. Starting in July, when I announced the first vaccination requirement for the federal government, about 95 million eligible Americans were unvaccinated, as was mentioned a little bit earlier. Today, we reduced that number to 67 eligible Americans who aren't vaccinated. And today, we released a new report outlining effective vaccination requirements that are already proving their worth.
So you have the Grinch, the president, who's decided to increase the pain in America just in time for the coming holidays. Of course, there's some other things that play into this, but mainly it's these mandates for 100 million employees. And again, these mandates do not carry the force of law. All they exist on is a piece of paper for the press release. And all that's enforcing them is the bully pulpit of the White House and a private sector that's all too willing to play proxy to the president's demands. And so the president, just like in the classic Grinch Stole Christmas story, carries a grudge and no one knows why. For some reason, he's decided to put the entire holiday travel season in jeopardy. Now, naturally, when you tell 100 million people who are clearly vaccine hesitant that they must be vaccinated, and you're implying that a transfer of immunity is going to take place when it actually doesn't, then a certain number of them will not comply. They've got questions that are unanswered, and some of them are very important people, it turns out, like pilots, which may explain why suddenly Southwest canceled 1,800 flights over the weekend. This, as you can imagine, created chaos at a ton of airports. Apparently over 300 so far canceled today. Now, Southwest is being a very obedient corporation who really wants to make the government happy, claims that the cancellations are not due to a lack of pilots because of mandated vaccinations, but it's due to the weather. Sure. They say, quote, ATC issues and disruptive weather have resulted in a high volume of cancellations throughout the weekend while we work to recover our operation. We appreciate your patience as we accommodate affected customers, and customer service wait times are longer than usual, end quote. But something isn't right. I don't think it's because of the weather. You have a union representing American Airlines that warned that staffing shortages could start as the holiday travel season begins if employees lose their jobs for refusing to take the COVID vaccine, the injection. And they said this, quote, what we're looking for is to ensure that there's a pilot in the cockpit. If you suddenly one day have 4,000 plus pilots that are unable to fly, that's a big deal. That's worse than this past summer, end quote. So it's clear what's happening, that the president, who was born with a heart 2 sizes too small, as the story goes, is inflicting even more pain on Americans just in time for the holiday season. See, it wasn't enough that he kicked thousands of healthcare workers to the curb. You remember how we celebrated those frontline workers, kicked them to the curb with jab mandates during a pandemic where we actually have a shortage of nurses because we were paying people to stay home. No, the Grinch wants more pain for all of us by taking a wrecking ball to the airline industry. And it's not like you can replace pilots of commercial airliners overnight. So what did Biden think was going to happen? Southwest Airlines Pilots Association is pushing back, and they've asked a court to temporarily block the company from carrying out federally mandated coronavirus injections until an existing lawsuit over alleged U.S. labor law violations is resolved. The association said, quote, the new vaccine mandate unlawfully imposes new conditions of employment, and the new policy threatens termination of any pilot pilot not fully vaccinated by December 8th, 2021. Southwest Airlines' additional new and unilateral modification of the parties' collective bargaining agreement is in clear violation of the RLA, end quote. Now, if you know anything at all about Southwest Airlines, they're known for their culture. Their employees are shareholders. Their stock ticker is LUV for love. The pins on the flight attendants are in the shape of a heart. Their original airport was Dallas Love Field. So ironic then how cold-hearted Southwest has been to their vaccine-hesitant employees. So much for all that talk about heart, apparently. They're down with the Grinch who wants to steal not just Christmas, but apparently Thanksgiving as well. Here's what Southwest had to say in a statement. Quote, the airline disagrees with Southwest Airlines' pilot association's claims that any COVID-related changes over the past several months require negotiation, end quote. Now, Southwest said in an emailed statement that the carrier is committed to working with its unions. They said, quote, as we continue navigating the challenges presented by the ongoing pandemic, end quote. So the Southwest Airlines Pilot Association is arguing that their pilots have a unique risk because adverse reactions to an injection could affect their ability to pass periodic medical examinations required to maintain their license. That makes sense. The union wants to negotiate, among other things, how such instances would be covered by long-term disability policies, which seems responsible. The Southwest Pilot Association went on to say that their pilots are tired in a statement and frustrated because our operation is running on empty due to a lack of support from the company. SWAPA has grave concerns about the direction Southwest Airlines has taken in putting profits ahead of people. Enough is enough. We need leadership, not apologies. We need accountability, blah, blah, blah. We need concrete action, blah, blah, blah. Our employees and our customers, end quote. I agree with this. I agree with this. This is the same thing that we've all been saying. Southwest Airlines, like all big corporations, though, they don't care. They just pretend that they're all heart. Maybe they can start by making little heart-shaped pins that say myocarditis on them. In any case, what Southwest Airlines Pilot Association is doing is what more unions and more employees and more everyday Americans must do to actually resist, to something real, or it's never going to stop. It requires your complacency and your permission, your consent. See, if you haven't figured it out yet, the administration has discovered that the Wuhan virus is incredibly useful. It explains away inflation, poor jobs numbers, and labor shortages. But even better, because COVID is a pretext for the biggest expansion of federal government power in history, and not just in the United States. Because COVID becomes the pretext for why you can't tweet what you want, go where you want, work how and where you want. Because COVID explains Joe Biden's poor job numbers. Because COVID is why our travel industry is breaking down just in time for the holidays. But of course, the truth is it's not at all why it's breaking down. It's because the Grinch who occupies the White House has a grudge and he does not care how much pain the average American is feeling right now. They have no intention of declaring the pandemic to be under control, even though he said he was going to end the virus, because it's too useful as a pretext for more control. But COVID, and it won't stop until we all say it does. When Americans, all of us, say enough is enough, and then it ends. There is no law. These jab mandates are edicts coming from the White House, being enforced by private employers. They are not at all even remotely legally binding. It's a piece of paper. It's an optic. It's literally nothing more than a press release. And this is tyranny. And we've been all too willing to go along, from 15 days to slow the spread to vaccination or you lose your livelihood. You want to stop this tyranny? You take a page from Poland during the Cold War. I had the opportunity to meet a former Polish president about 10 years ago. Solidarity, and literally not just solidarity, but also the name of the union, broke communism in Poland and Eastern Europe. All it took is enough people simply saying, no, we will not consent. Back then, the CIA, together with the Catholic Church and some Western Bloc nations, funneled several millions of dollars a year to, or actually a month, to a union called Solidarity. And over time, it helped break the communist chokehold on Poland. Lech Walesa, he was an absolute hero. And as I said, I met him about 10 years ago. And quick note, private sector unions and public sector unions are entirely different things. If you're private, you have absolutely a right to organize. If it's public sector, well, I get a little Catalina wine mixer with my dollars, and where my dollars go, I go. And you don't get to make negotiations without us, the lowly American taxpayer. Can you imagine, though, how would such a movement last with today's CIA? Because the CIA would actually be against it today. That's what it feels like, and that's what it actually is in America. Our federal government, rather than promoting freedom, they're actually promoting Marxism, authoritarianism, statism, tyranny, and they've partnered up with the private sector corporate agents who are all too willing to do their bidding. And of course, it's all run by the Grinch in chief, who just might steal Christmas and every other holiday coming up because their policies are making everything far more chaotic. And I'm serious about holidays being up in the air. I'm still making plans, but who knows if the plane will even be ready to go, wheels up at this point. And for everyone who says just drive, when you have some family members, as I do, who are permanently disabled and are actually barred from long car rides and even long plane rides, it becomes a little difficult. Planes need pilots. They also need flight attendants, just as hospitals need nurses during a pandemic. So firing them for arbitrary injection mandates that aren't even supported by science nor law is to purposely hamstring the country's critical infrastructure. And things can and probably will get much worse from here. Amtrak, by the way, they're canceling now suddenly all these routes. The travel industry is always stretched. You can take a chunk of our travel industry's best employees by insisting on violating their personal freedom and bodily autonomy, and the system will break. And the story of the Grinch, no one quite knew what the Grinch's grudge was about. He was just selfish. It's not why Biden seems dead set on breaking everything he touches. I've seen toddlers do less damage. We just had a year with far more coronavirus mitigation policies in place, high vaccination rates, and yet we had more fatalities this year under this president. Everything is going wrong, in the wrong direction. But yet, you have the Grinch muddling up to the teleprompter each day and insisting on making it worse. People need their jobs, people need to see their families, and people need their holidays now more than ever. And increasingly, it seems like this grudge against hardworking average Americans who keep this country working, like you all are paying the price the most. We all are. So coming up, we have more on this with Victor Davis Hanson. He breaks down the dangerous, diminishing power of the independent American citizen. Keep it here. Big tech is taking advantage of everyone, and while they mine and sell and remine your data, they're counting their money and abusing our privacy. If you really think that of course you should have known that because you signed up to be a product. You really think that your emails and texts and messages are private and safe from governments, hackers, and profit-hungry corporations? If so, think again, because this is where Secure comes in. Secure's email platform is 100% private. It's Swiss hosted, has no ties to big tech in the US at least. And with Secure, there's no data mining whatsoever. And this is what makes Secure quite different. When it comes to security and privacy, Secure is simply unmatched. And there's a reason they built their company the way they did. So take a stand and take back your privacy. With discount code Dana, Secure will only cost you $7.50 a month for full access, which was like what, less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks? Visit secure.com today and create your secure email address and account and use code Dana for 25% off for the year. That's secure, SEKUR.com, promo code Dana for 25% off. So if it feels like every week there's some new crisis unfolding in America, it's because there is. Victor Davis Hanson says all of these daily melodramas are the natural dividends of the diminishing power of the independent American citizen. Now, he has a new book out. It's called The Dying Citizen: How Progressive Elites, Tribalism, and Globalization Are Destroying the Idea of America. It's out now, and he joins me to discuss where we are and where we're going if this keeps up. And I have to ask you, Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much for joining me. It's very good to see you. The Dying Citizen, your book, as I understand it, and I was reading about this shortly before we are meeting here now, you're having some difficulty with Amazon for this because Amazon is saying that they're just all out. They don't have any copies of your book anymore. They're all out to be able to sell on Amazon, which I find interesting. What's going on with this?
I don't know. You know, it's very strange that I've written 24 books. This has never happened. But the book came out last Tuesday, and it went up to 2 to 3 on Amazon's ratings, and it was selling. And then by the end of the next day, only the second day it had been out, suddenly people started calling me and said it says soon to be in stock, meaning you couldn't get it. And so I called the publisher. They were very helpful. They said, no, they have thousands of copies. We can guarantee you. We did a huge first printing, and then they were baffled. And for the next 6 days until, as I speak right now, I keep getting emails from people every day saying, you know, I ordered the book, or I wanted to order, but it says it's soon to be in stock, or I have to wait 2 weeks. But how could a book be not in stock by the second day if you have so many thousands? You know, I don't understand it. I don't know what's going on. They haven't given an explanation, but people can order it from Barnes & Noble, or they can just order it, and I guess it'll be sent when it's sent. But it's crazy to have all that
I think
initial
they should
interest.
actually, it kind of works. I mean, to me, although, I mean, obviously you would like to be able to make those sales and get that idea out, through every means, but because I think they would work, people like New York Times bestseller list, I think that they would really enjoy doing everything that they could to keep you off that list. And they have, so Books A Million and Barnes & Noble, they're weighted more to make that list than Amazon is. So that actually might work out in your favor if you have to send everybody to all of these outlets where the sales are weighted more.
Yeah, it could. I'm just, I really wanted to write a book that put and I didn't know it was going to get this bad. I thought it would, but I wasn't sure. But about the border or globalization or this retribalization, all of these things that are in the news, I wanted to put into a historical, cultural perspective. And then, I didn't know that when the book actually came out that things I had warned about would be this bad. I mean, I really didn't think the border would be wide open, or I shouldn't say wide open, cease to exist would be a better description.
No, I think that's right. Cease to exist in most all of the parts. And then in the parts where only government officials go, like El Paso, that's where they actually do have a wall up, and they actually are able to have that force multiplier there, which is interesting to me. You had a really interesting piece, and I wanted to quote a part of it, where you talk about how Americans came to accept through civic education and constant self-criticism that America was one of the few successful multiracial and multi-ethnic democracies in history. I mean, today's Columbus Day, so I know most people, at least in politics and culture, have spent a good part of today arguing about this Italian explorer funded by Spanish Catholics who came over here, and because, the Americas, as you know, were just complete place. It was the Garden of Eden. I mean, there was no evil, there was no war, there was no sin, selfishness, no enslavement, and it was that Italian that brought it all over here. I mean, at least if you listen to the woke crowd, the CRT advocates, that's what they promote. And so that is, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because that's what I've always really loved about this country. Everyone's centered around freedom and not ethnicity or not a religion or anything like that, just freedom. And melting pot used to be a great adjective before it really became unofficially banned by the woke crowd. Share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think people have to understand history is tragedy. It's not melodrama where you go back and say, according to the present, we're going to use these values to condemn the past. When people from Europe, the Spanish, arrived, let's say in Mexico, to take one example, in 1521 and 2, the Aztecs, just 30 years earlier, had killed over 20,000 people in a 4-day period in human sacrifice. So it wasn't paradise. And yes, they brought diseases, the Europeans did. And yes, they brought whooping cough. And yes, they brought religion. But they also, I mean, you could make the argument that they also inherited tobacco. And there was more sugar here. Sugar was soon going to be grown here, and cocaine. So we don't want to go into this. Well, the Europeans brought all these bad things, but indigenous people were completely pristine, and that's not true. That's not how history works. But as far as Knights of Columbus, there was a poll, you remember, Dana, it was 2-1 Americans wanted to have the national holiday. And here we have this ridiculous situation where millions of indigenous people, and that's not my term, but their description from southern Mexico or Central America, are risking their lives to leave their indigenous cultures and governments and go north of the border. And why is that? Because of market capitalism, constitutional protected freedom. These ideas were not here in America until after 1492, and yet people who are indigenous don't have to accept them. They're under no compulsion to come north, but they want to. They want to accept a different paradigm from what had been the norm before Columbus and is the norm in many places after Columbus. And how ironic that where I live in this Mexican-American community, I know so many Mexican-Americans who are members of willingly the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic charitable organization, because it was founded to help middle class and working class immigrants. That was the idea. Poor Italians were being discriminated, and then their focus shifted to Mexican American people. So this is an elite driven top down Latin. It's like the word Latinx. I mean, nobody that I've ever met who's Mexican American ever described themselves as Latinx. Just like nobody I've ever met said we've got to get rid of Columbus Day outside of where I work at a campus. So it's an artificially driven.
You bring up a really good point. You bring up a very good point in that, the ideas of our republic, that was also brought over. The ideas of individual liberty, all of that was brought over, which now kind of, this is where we're at, because we have people telling us that these are all very bad ideas, and it's somehow evidence of privilege, being able to make individual decisions, that this is somehow it's privileged, or it's all a part of this critical race theory, this Marxist ideology. And that ultimately is what you said, it's, top-down driven, it's elite driven. I mean, that really is kind of it. I'm shocked continually every day by the number of people who cannot make a decision without the government's involvement or the government weighing in, whether it's the CDC or NIAID or whatever it is, whether it's Fauci, like trick or treating, or just being able to go, like, you have to have government guidance on wearing a mask and just like being sensible.
Yeah, I have a chapter in the book called The Unelected, and these are people who have combined the judicial, legislative, and executive branches. So a guy like Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, along with the CDC bureaucrats, they can even suspend the right to collect rent from landlords. They can tell us, they can disrupt the freedom of association as guaranteed on the Constitution, which would be okay if we were in a national emergency, but according to their own statements, there was never a Wuhan virology security lab for origin or genesis of this epidemic. We know that's false. According to what they say, the United States never helped subsidize the gain of function research. We know that's not true. We know this. We're confused when they say one mask, no mask, two masks. They've never been able to tell us why 100 million Americans that have had COVID and have naturally acquired immunity, which science says is superior now to vaccinated driven immunity, why they can't go to a restaurant with a card that says they have antibodies. They just won't answer that. So they've lost so much credibility, this bureaucracy. And this comes on the tail. I mean, we're living in an era now of Robert Mueller, who doesn't know what Fusion GPS or the Steele dossier, he says under oath, which were the catalyst for his own 22-month investigation. Or James Comey can't remember 240 times under oath when asked about his own investigation. Or General Milley seems to think that he can interrupt the chain of command about nuclear protocols when that's not legal. He's an advisory role as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, where he calls his counterpart in China. And notice there's also this China thing that comes up with our elites. Mm-hmm. Why Hunter Biden apparently still own 10% of a Chinese Communist government affiliated company? Or why does General Milley think he can be so intimate with the Chinese to warn them of a possible preemptive action? Or why does Dr. Fauci think that the Wuhan lab needs $600,000 in American money to increase the function and the lethality or the transmissibility of viruses? So there's an insidious role that China is playing among our global elite. It's really scary, and they're not accountable to us, the voters. They're not.
No, I completely agree with that. And you mentioned China. I keep looking at the supply chain crisis. There were no shortage of headlines about that today. And I realize that there are a lot of things that play into that. You have some of the union decisions and the union bosses making determinations about leveraging this for increased payer benefits. But of course, you also have paying people to stay home. And then you have these ridiculous regulations, just like with any industry, that also affect this, and because of this pandemic too. Do you think that, I was trying to look for a silver lining in this, and I don't want anyone's business to suffer, as I'm sure you don't either. But when looking at, how there could be a disruption of materials coming in for Christmas, isn't that kind of also part of the problem? Do you think that could backfire on this top-down, elite-driven idea of like punishing people into this coercion, and that we could just say, you know what, we're just going to be less consumerist. We're just going to be more self-sufficient and buy local and buy USA made, and we don't need all this stuff coming in from China. What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of people are, I don't know what the right term is, maybe it's a monastery of the mind. They're just withdrawing, and you can see that across the spectrum. They don't want to. Do you remember when we were young? I'm not much older than you are, but people really did watch the Oscars or the Tonys or the Emmys. Yeah. Nobody cares anymore. They completely destroyed themselves. And America, if it wasn't for this 1.4 billion market in China, I think the NBA would be destroyed. They've lost so much market share. Because people say, I'm just not going to participate. And if people cannot get consumer goods from China because, you look out at Los Angeles, the ships are stacked all the way to the horizon, they're going to say, maybe I can get along without this stuff. But the problem with what the left is doing is, whether it's destroying the idea of a border or bringing back stagflation or destroying our deterrence in Afghanistan is that it's not just going to discredit the left, it's going to hurt all of us because we're all touched by it. And no one's an island. And my gosh, they've gone after every single thing that it's kind of a year zero revolution. We're told that 1776 is not the founding of a country, or we're told that we need a new national anthem. We're going to have two of them. We're going to have a different flag. It's a holistic French revolutionary attempt to redefine every aspect of our lives so that they can control the past in the present, so they can determine our future. We've really got to stand up and speak out against it, each according to our station.
Exactly. One last thing for you. I know in your book you touch on this, and you have quite a lot in your writings as well, the tribalism, because that also, and that's very much encouraged by the left, because I just remember, and I know some factions of the right are getting into it, but by and large, people who are constitutionally minded and people who just simply want to be left alone have never really bought into that idea of tribalism that much. We don't look at issues as people or vice versa. But it's really being encouraged by the left. And you made a great point and made me think of this when you mentioned how nobody watches the Oscars. Usually, everybody did. And then you would have those water cooler conversations the next day. You don't have those cultural touch points anymore. You don't have that fellowship. Even if you disagreed with a lot of what people are saying, you still had that cultural fellowship. And now you have this heightened tribalism. I'm not even quite sure how that is reduced. I mean, how is a tribalism like this, where reason can exist in that space? How do you even combat that? Or are we past a point of no return?
Well, it's top driven and it's careerist, because we're the only multiracial democracy republic that's ever worked. Brazil tries it, India tries it with less success. So everybody knows that if you or I want to go to China or Japan or Mexico and say, I want to be a citizen and I want to advance in your society, we're not going to be able to make it because we don't look like those people. Maybe even the same is true of Europe. I don't think that Barack Obama could be Chancellor of Germany. It's only this country that allows everybody of every background. So why would we tamper with it? And all I can come up with is, I don't believe it's sincere when I see the BLM co-founder, who's the self-described Marxist, Ms. Quellar's, buying 4 homes and moving to Topanga Canyon near Malibu, or Oprah complaining from a $90 million estate in Montecito to Meghan Markle and her $14 million, or the Obamas in a $24 million Martha's Vineyard estate venturing out once in a while to lecture us how illiberal they are. So I think it's kind of I don't know, it's a guilt or projection. I have so much and I feel guilty, so I'm going to be on the cutting edge of societal, social justice activism, and then I get to keep all my stuff. And it's really disgusting how and the real issue is class. It always is. Middle class people have legitimate complaints that they're shrinking in their buying power, but it's not coordinated exactly with race anymore. And so people who are very wealthy of non-white persuasions, and they want to continue to say that they're victimized, even though if you look at statistics, I think there's 16 different ethnic groups that make more money, and I'm proud that that's true, than so-called white people. So we've transcended race. Our biggest question is class, but the left just wants to hit race, because I feel that their issues are no longer appealing to 51% of the people. So they either have to change the demography or change the system, get rid of the Electoral College, or the 9-person Supreme Court, or the filibuster, or open the border. But anything other than to try to convince people of the logic of their arguments, they just can't do it because they're not logical.
Completely agree. And focusing on race as opposed to wealth, which is something that people, at least right now in the United States, thankfully can still change. Victor Davis Hanson. Okay. And congrats on the new book that is out, and we're going to keep an eye on that story. I mean, please keep everybody updated as to what Amazon decides to do. I just find that whole thing, it's just very curious timing. Your first week out.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Second day, it just went out of stock. When there was plenty of books, I was full.
Exactly. It should be number 1 on the bestsellers list then. Yeah. If all the stock is gone, they could fix need to fix their rankings.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, sir. Good to see you.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Of course, always. All right, folks, coming up, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt joins me to discuss his very recent security briefing. He was one of those governors at the border, and how DHS has just canceled all the remaining contracts for the border wall. Stay with us. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is skyrocketing. So instead of following the previous administration's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that people cannot pay for. So it's time to take proactive steps to protect your wealth and retirement by investing in gold and precious metals. And Legacy Precious Metals can help you. Washington keeps printing money to pay for their outrageous bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation. And as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals, they're the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. And they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of all kinds of useful info at legacypminvestments.com. So the Department of Homeland Security is terminating border wall contracts, all while borders look like they're in the middle of a massive crisis. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt had a security briefing with Texas law enforcement officials just last week. It's when you saw a bunch of governors who actually care about the border go down and actually see it. He saw firsthand why this is another horrible policy and a long list of failures regarding our southern border. Governor Stitt, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. I got to ask you, what did you see when you were down there? What did you walk away? Did it dramatically alter your idea of how bad the situation at the border was? It's one thing to see it on camera. It's another thing to be down there and see it firsthand. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, well, first off, myself and 25 other governors, so 26 governors out of the 50, so more than half of the country, asked President Biden for a meeting and nothing. He ignored us, crickets, refused to have a meeting with us. So 10 governors, we went down to the border, and it is a tremendous crisis. Governor Ducey, Governor Abbott, this affects every single state because the drugs coming into Oklahoma are coming from Mexico. Our fentanyl deaths are up, methamphetamines. We just indicted a drug kingpin from Mexico with 2,000 pounds of meth. So it is a crisis coming across our border. But I'll tell you this: the takeaway that I got was we need to change one policy. When President Trump was in office, if you were seeking asylum in the U.S., you had to stay in Mexico until your court date. Biden changed that day one, and basically, if you touch the U.S. soil, they're going to release you into the U.S. with all the social services, and then tell you, hey, come back on the honor system in 2 years to your appointed court date. And in effect, you basically know that you're going to get released into the U.S. as long as you just touch a U.S. soil. And so that has created just tremendous mass migration. And we need to change that one policy to stop the flood of people coming into the U.S.
And that's something, Governor, that a lot of people don't realize is just because it's happening at the border doesn't mean it doesn't affect other parts of the interior. You know, you're talking about these massive drug busts. And of course, you know, people coming in, I thought we were in a pandemic. If I were to leave and then come back in the country, I have to provide a negative test or have a vax pass, a coronavirus injection pass. But individuals at the southern border, they don't have to provide such evidence at all whatsoever. There have been numerous reports about this from people who've been on the ground. Not only have they heard this from those people crossing illegally into the country themselves, but also a lot of the really kind of left-leaning organizations that are down there that are trying to get people in and get them out and help and get them transferred to other parts of the interior. How would something like that affect Oklahoma, especially when you have the federal government, Governor, they're trying to say, well, if you get to a certain percentage, you have like this many hospitalizations, you have XYZ, well, then we're going to come in, that eviction moratorium is going to, they try doing that, or they're going to try to do some other kind of top-down mandate because of an increased, maybe perhaps transmission rate, that people can't say that it couldn't be transmitted this way. If I get yelled at for not wearing a face mask going through a drive-through, then I'm sure that this probably can contribute to it as well. I just wanted to get your thoughts on all of the effects that something like this has on the interior.
Well, everything that comes out of this administration is just political theater. And they've lost confidence in the American people because people are smart enough to see right through this political nonsense. 18% of the people that are coming across the border are being tested and are positive for COVID. yet they're refusing. They're trying to mandate and vaccinate. I mean, they're trying to mandate policy and dictate to American citizens. It's preposterous. And you know, I want everybody to know that in Oklahoma, we believe in freedoms. And as long as I'm governor, we're not going to mandate vaccines. This is personal choice. These are freedoms. I love what Ronald Reagan said. Ronald Reagan's favorite definition of freedom was freedom is the ability to say no. And right now, it's like we've lost the ability to say, you know what, for my choice or for my family, this is my decision. And we're not gonna listen to some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. say what's best for me and my kids.
How far are you willing to go in your office to protect people from these mandates? Like, for instance, we were talking about the pilot shortage that's going to be upcoming because the pilots unions are pushing back against American Airlines, Southwest. I realize that it's not legally binding, as I understand it, that the proper procedure hasn't been followed, especially with OSHA, to make something like this an actual, you know, maybe loosely defined, legally binding edict from the president. But what can you do in your position as governor to shield your citizens? And what would you encourage other governors to do to shield their citizens from the negative impact of mandates like this?
Well, you know, myself and our legislature, I signed into law that we will not mandate face masks or vaccines. Nothing in the law prohibits a parent from choosing that for their child. It just simply says that we're not going to require every single parent to do that same thing. So we've done that for our public schools, any of our public building, government buildings. Private businesses is where, you know, I haven't taken that stance because I believe it's a slippery slope when the government starts getting involved with public business and telling a private business what they can or can't do. But certainly we're going to fight back when the federal government comes in and says every business over 100 employees is going to mandate a vaccine. That's where we say, not in Oklahoma. So our attorney general, we're going to continue to fight back on that government overreach. But as far as if a private business wants to mandate something, right, that's where we're really in this conflicted situation there, because right now you might agree or not really care about that, but tomorrow it may be a different story. Maybe they're wanting the government to do something. So you have to kind of draw a line, and that's where we've talked about a private business. We're a right to work state, and citizens, if they don't like that decision, that business, they choose to spend their money elsewhere. And that's right, kind of the free market system that we live in.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, the federal mandates, definitely. Yeah, that's when the federal government's trying to get a private business to do it, that's one thing. A private business chooses, that's another. One last quick question. We got about a minute left, Governor. I know that you've ordered really quickly an audit of the Department of Education. This is the first ever, as I understand it. Give us some insight into this real quick if you can.
Yeah, well, I want Oklahoma to have a top 10 education system. So we funded $3.2 billion. It's the largest spend we've ever appropriated in our state's history. I also gave our teachers a pay raise when I first came into office, but they also have now about $680 million of CARES funding that came in. So more money than we've ever had in education, and I want transparency. I want to know where those dollars are being spent, and never once in our state history have we asked for an audit of education. And so we want to make sure that parents deserve, and we want transparency on where every dollar in the state government goes.
Yeah, and that's good. Everybody should know. Taxpayers, parents, everybody should know exactly what's happening and where their money's going and what it's funding with education. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, appreciate your time, sir, and appreciate your consistency on these issues. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Coming up, folks, the very first ever presidential proclamation of Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll discuss. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. And they develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus that they've learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. In 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil and carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther that's directly sourced from a small farm in Guatemala. Guatemala. So although the temperatures are kind of cooling off, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. The best way to do it is the Black Rifle Coffee Club. They can brew it and ship it, brew it, package it, ship it right to your door. And you can also get special discounts and access to exclusive products and a lot more. So purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase in your first coffee club order. Well, happy Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, whatever. President Joe Biden on Friday was celebrated as issuing the first ever presidential proclamation of Indigenous Peoples Day, continuing the effort to refocus the federal holiday celebrating Christopher Columbus toward an appreciation of Native peoples. Finally, first for Democrats, because remember, it was the Democrat Party that actually ignored a Supreme Court order, defied it, and rounded all the Indigenous peoples up and sent them on the trail of genocide. So I guess they want everyone to forget about this now. It would be one thing, though, if this was simply about celebrating the Indigenous people of America, because I think we're all Indigenous. That's a worthwhile thing. As Native Americans and their culture, they're very much worth celebrating and part of the fabric of America and the overall story. However, you got to be honest, because you actually know what's going on here. It's all part of a continuing effort to recast the American story as being characterized by and founded in evil, because the progressive left, who seized control of the Democrat Party in virtually every institution in America, has decided that in order to radically change America, you have to denigrate it constantly. So Christopher Columbus and the day named after the Italian man who discovered the New World for Europe must also be denigrated. And that means he must now be a perfectly moral human being who never made any mistakes, according to today's standards, or else we cannot honor him. Which, of course, by that standard, we wouldn't be able to honor anyone, including people like Martin Luther King Jr., a pastor who was accused of being a serial adulterer. Now, dozens of cities across America have essentially canceled Christopher Columbus Day. Already, they traded it in for Indigenous Peoples Day. And since being morally perfect is a prerequisite to have a day named after you, no word from the Biden administration on what to do about the fact that some Indigenous people practice things like human sacrifice and genocide, and some of them actually had slaves. But remember, the point is not logic or consistency. It's the constant and steady denigration of all American traditions. So Christopher Columbus is now to be regarded as yet another stain on America's history, as he brought with him disease and committed various atrocities, which is why on the president's proclamation about Columbus Day, he only got 2 short paragraphs into it, in which he said some nice things about Italian-American contributions, before then spending a very long 3rd paragraph talking about how nasty Europeans are. Now, here's some of what he said. Remember, this is to celebrate Columbus Day. He says, quote, "Today we acknowledge the painful history of wrongs and atrocities that many European explorers inflicted on tribal nations and indigenous communities. For Native Americans, Western exploration ushered in a wave of devastation, violence perpetrated against Native communities, displacement, and a theft of tribal homelands and introduction. They spread disease, blah, 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 more." Whose party did that? Wait, whose party? Democrats, they did? I mean, not only did they love sending people on the trail of genocide, but they also loved rounding people up and putting them in encampments during World War II with Japanese internment camps. We're going to say also nothing about the Irish and how they were treated in the United States, and we won't say anything about certain native tribes, certain nations actually owning slaves as well, but we'll get past that, right? This is the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is the one that moved people forcibly and put them on different land, and then in some instances doesn't even let them own their own property. So you just, one proclamation completely erases that? Or a white woman up in Massachusetts claiming that she's Indigenous American and that her book that she plagiarized recipes on, Pow Wow Chow, her insistence that apparently Indigenous Americans loved things like crab dip historically. Biden's Indigenous Peoples Day, his proclamation, had no such negativity, of course, just celebrating the positive. But Columbus Day, he celebrates it by talking how evil Europeans are. It's like wishing someone a happy birthday by saying that they suck. And by the way, this idea that, like I said, Indigenous people were living in a Garden of Eden, veritable paradise with no racism, no war over land, no tribal conflict until those evil Europeans showed up, that's a kind of a massive lie, because conquest and war and hatred, they're as old as man. Slavery too. Native Americans engaged in such behaviors just as all people have from the very beginning of time. Yet we act like certain people are sanctified as saints because of skin color or ethnicities, and so many other cultures, for the great many things about their culture, we look at things that, like that, identity, like ethnicity. That's the thing that makes it to where they couldn't have participated in any kind of atrocity. It doesn't make sense. Here's San Antonio Spurs coach Greg Popovich. I have another word, by the way, that rhymes with his last name, and I'm not going to share it with you because I'll get fined, about how reprehensible it is that anyone would celebrate Columbus Day at all. If you are cold and need some hot air, watch this.
I'm a little confused about our city and why it's Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day. Columbus? I mean, he initiated a New World genocide. It's no knock on Italian Americans. That's a silly argument. You know, it's like saying we should be proud of Hitler because we're German. I mean, it makes no sense. It's about Columbus. It's not about Italian Americans.
This idea that you have to denigrate Columbus because of what everybody else did is without context, and it's also stupid. And just the absolute irony of a guy who's so white he actually looks washed out on screen, who votes Democrat, who has the audacity to lecture other people about what happened to Indigenous people. If he really felt that way, he wouldn't be supporting progressivism. If Greg Popovich really felt that way, he wouldn't continually support the party that actually did that to the people that he's acting like such a white knight for now, and I mean that quite literally. Indigenous people are all good, Europeans are all bad, and the only people who conquered people and went on conquest and took slaves were apparently Europeans who then became Americans, according to people like Greg Popovich. Therefore, Christopher Columbus is canceled, but not any of the Democrats that actually engaged in the trail of genocide. Okay, whatever. We can't see people as nuanced and complicated with good and bad. We have to see people monochromatically, all good or all bad, no nuance. So Christopher Columbus and Columbus Day is now something to be ashamed of because the Christian underpinning of America must be undone in order to transform America to a Marxist nation. And to do that, you have to change every last American story, and you have to replace them with new horrible ones. And every story, every figure of history must be portrayed as evil until there are no stories, no rituals, no figures, nothing left that Americans can share together and take pride in. And that's the real point. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.